Hello and welcome to the Integrative Health Convention 2019 online interviews. And today we're going to find out more about stress and QiGong with John Millar, who's speaking at the Integrative Health Convention 2019 on the weekend of the 5th and 6th of October at the Park Plaza, Victoria in central London. So this is John Millar. Hi, John.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. He's a QiGong practitioner with an interest in integration of QiGong. And John came last year to the Integrative Health Convention and talked about QiGong again, but this time talking about stress and QiGong. For those who didn't find out about you last year, John, can you let the audience know a bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's probably worth saying a little bit about QiGong to start with. I consider QiGong a way of combining body and mind in a single practice. So it's a meditation that you use the breath or the mind or the body to enhance. And I've been studying for quite a while now, and I'm fascinated not just in the way that you can practice QiGong, the way that you can actually use movement in order to create significant improvements in health, but also in the way that, well, the questions that it asks and the way that you can actually take it into interesting places. So I work in corporate, I work as an integrative practitioner working alongside GPs, and I also train teachers in QiGong through the Monkeys School.
Oh, thank you. Can you tell the audience here about why you got interested in what you do and the story behind it?
Yeah, it's quite a long story, so sort of précis down. I became interested in really spiritual practice and self-cultivation. And along the way, I came across a number of different types of healing. And none of them quite resonated with me. And then I went to see a guy who was going to train me in Reiki, and he took one look at me and he said, you know what, this isn't for you. What you want is QiGong. And so I was like, really? What's this? Mm-hmm. And I think what he saw was that I have a tendency for movement in everything that I do. So it's very easy to then embrace that movement in a different way, whereas he considered Reiki to be a more stationary practice. And after that, there were just opportunities kept coming up. So one of my first teachers was a Tibetan Buddhist, Mandarin-speaking Tibetan Buddhist, which was interesting because I didn't speak any Mandarin, and I studied with him for a few years. And then I've gone on to train in 7 different schools of QiGong, qualified to teach in 4 of them. But I found myself being drawn into a system called QiGong, because for me, I find that the frameworks and the ideas and the practices that sit within it have the most potential, not only for my personal practice, but also in having conversations with other people and making the work accessible. So in 2010-ish, I stopped working as I was an IT consultant and trainer, and started bringing QiGong more into the mainstream. So I've worked in the UK, in mainland Europe, and the Middle East, bringing QiGong in as a method to explore well-being, leadership development, communication skills. Yeah, I've also embraced this idea of how can you get people to share QiGong. And so the Monkeys School is about training people in how can you take this really powerful tool and make it accessible to a far wider audience.
Absolutely, thank you. And in October at the Park Plaza, at the convention, you're going to talk about stress and QiGong. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and what the audience will get out of it?
Yeah, well, it's probably worth saying that the reason that stress is such an important piece for me is that I've got it so badly wrong in the past. I'm so good at making mistakes and learning from them. Well, I say I'm so good at learning from mistakes. I'm obviously still learning. But I got signed off work in the IT sector with work-related stress, and it shook me quite a bit, because at the time I was teaching QiGong, I was practicing QiGong, I was practicing for sort of 2 hours a day. And what I realized in retrospect was that I was using a very powerful practice to cope with everyday stress. And I can only describe it as, if the practice or if the coping strategy is really, really good, what you do is you just back the stress up to a point that when it breaks, it really breaks. And so I started looking at it and going, well, what have I done wrong? And actually, the idea that sat within it was really simple. What I did wrong was I failed to actually make my QiGong something that occurred the whole time. I was only doing the practice for 2 hours a day. I wasn't taking the time to take the benefit of the practice and integrate it into everything that I did. So I use analogies of animals quite a lot. And I talk about this idea that if a deer gets stressed, what does it do? Well, it runs away. That's the natural response. A stressor comes in, you let it go. A stressor comes in, you let it go. What I was doing was if I was a deer, I was thinking, what would be a really good way to do this is just do one really big runaway at the beginning of the day, so that I can face up to all my stress and discomfort and everything else that goes on during my working day. And then at the end of it, I'll do one more really big runaway. And it didn't work. So the work around stress comes from a lot of reading around and a lot of exploration around current scientific exploration of it. And then also having been working with this now since, well, really, I guess, working effectively since about 2010 on this area, it's building up that body of evidence and that experience of what's actually working for people. How you can take something that effectively is a very simple habit and giving it to people so that they can then do amazing things with it. And so the talk is really going to be focusing more on what can you get out of QiGong in order to cope with stress than what has QiGong got to do with stress, because you don't need all the academic stuff if you're working with somebody who is in that stress state. That'll just stress them out even more. You need simple, effective tools that actually make a difference.
Brilliant. So as you've been last year, the audience will be made up of doctors, therapists, and some members of the public. Where do you see this thing fitting in with integrative health and the people coming?
I believe very strongly that there are 3 aspects to, well, certainly with QiGong, there are 3 aspects to the practice. And one of those aspects is really important when you look at integration. So the 3 aspects of the practice, which is the act of standing there and waving your arms and legs around and breathing in a certain way. That by itself is just movement. It's just breath. It doesn't have a massive amount of potential. Unless the mind is engaged with it. So you need to have an understanding of what the mind should be doing. Because as soon as the movement and the mind, as soon as the body and the mind come together, you then have a far more powerful tool. But then there's an argument that at this point, it also has limited potential. There was one of the people who comes to me fairly regularly, came to me very upset one day, and they said that somebody they know had said that unless they practice QiGong for 2 hours a day, it's a waste of time. What do you think? And they said, you know, what do I think of that? And I had to pause and think about it. And I had to say, why do you think only practicing QiGong for 2 hours a day will be effective? Surely the trick is that the thing that you do has an effect the whole time. And this is the application, and this is where the integration of it works. It's not about training people in the ideas, in the deeper psychological and philosophical ideas that sit within the practice. It's not about training people in correct movement. It's about sharing habits and sharing simple things that you can then use. And there was a client came to me a couple of days ago who was saying about she needed to have a particular operation, but her blood pressure was consistently too high. So she was interested in what can I do in order to actually bring my blood pressure down, because obviously it was a downward spiral for her. Every time she walked in, she was worrying that her blood pressure was going to be too high, and lo and behold, her blood pressure was too high. So introducing techniques that mean that when people are aware that they're going into this spiral, how can you take them out of them? And for her, the technique was simply stand up and notice one part of the body and just allow that part to relax. And lo and behold, the blood pressure came down to normal. So it can be simple techniques like that, but it can be far more deeply effective work as well.
Right. I like that because I was just reading this book. Daniel Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence, his latest book was on altered traits, it's called. And the belief is that if you spend enough time in altered states, which for him was meditation, that they've proven that it can probably change your traits. So structurally change your brain and have permanent changes rather than just temporary changes. Like you said, what's the point of doing it? Because you're not going to get enough change in that time if you're doing it just an hour, just half an hour, just 20 minutes.
Yeah, it needs to sit in the whole place. There was a lovely story that I heard. There was a large center in China that practiced QiGong, which is the practice that I have, and they had about 400,000 people go through with significant health conditions, and they only used the practice of QiGong in order to create healing. And the thing I find interesting is that we have the normal stories of people going in with advanced cancer, with Parkinson's, with all kinds of things that we would traditionally go, wow, significant illness. And a lot of people gained recovery from it. Now that to me, I don't find particularly surprising. We all know people who've done astonishing things when they've had a really, when the prognosis hasn't been good. But there was another story that came out of the center that I just love because it's so challenging. And the story is about people growing their teeth back in adulthood.
No.
Yeah. And I was fascinated by it because I can fully accept that somebody can go into complete remission from cancer. I fully accept that, these major diseases of modern life, we all meet people who've done astonishing things with them. But the idea of growing teeth back, I couldn't believe it. So I started investigating it, and I was talking to a number of people who actually were at the center at the time. And they all told me the same story. They all said the people who grew their teeth back were of a certain age, and their only education was Mao's Little Red Book. The bottom line is that nobody had told them that they couldn't grow a third set of teeth. So for them, so for them, it was this thing about, well, they didn't think it was impossible. There was no part of them that reacted in the way that you or I react to that story.
Yeah.
And so when the first guy started to do a practice and started to grow his teeth back, the guy sitting next to him probably went, wow, that's a really good idea. Why didn't I think of that? And he started, he grew his teeth back. But as soon as you allow yourself to get in the way of things, which we do all the time,
absolutely,
then that type of thing, which is both really difficult to accept, but actually we've already grown 2 sets, so why can't we grow a third? Those types of questions become very interesting with very, very simple practice. What potential have you got?
Wow. So I'm asking one last question. What do you think in particular is the key to health and healing in what you do?
This changes as I go through, and at the moment, one of the things I'm really fascinated by is the nature of holistic health. Because I think that when you look at this holistic approach, what we tend to consider is the human as the whole. Mm-hmm. What we don't necessarily consider is the family environment or the work environment or any of these places as being part of that whole when you're working with somebody to create healing. So what I'm fascinated by is the way that you can communicate with people in that interaction that not only helps them, but also that helps them gain the health benefit, but also helps them express what they're doing in a way that other people believe them. If I give somebody a practice so that every day their partner sees them go out into the garden and wave their arms around and make strange noises, the chances are the partner's just going to be going, oh, that's just their weird stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if what you do is you give them a way of actually expressing it in a way that's culturally acceptable, that makes sense, that builds trust in it, then instead of the, oh, that's just their stuff, or are you sure this is going to work type of response that you get from people, you then get the partner or the work colleague or the boss actually engaging in it as going, wow, yeah, that makes sense. I'd be really interested to find out how you got on with that. And that creates so much more potential, because there's no longer that doubt that you have to live with, be that a work colleague, be that a family member. So how can you express the work that you do in a way that actually works holistically, in the sense of not just the body, but also the far bigger picture?
Mm.
And so, yeah, that's the thing that I'm finding the most benefit in at the moment.
Mm. Amazing. So thank you. Thanks, John. Thank you everyone for listening. So remember to get your tickets early. They are a limited number from our website by following the links below. We are the Integrative Health Convention at the Park Plaza Victoria in London on the 5th and 6th of October 2019. You can use the discount code video5, which will give you a 5% discount as a gift from us to you for sharing your time with us. When we see you in October in London, we'll get to meet you there. You can meet John, myself, and all our other amazing speakers, and then learn so much more with you then. Great. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Dave.